Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you for your kind introduction. Thank you, Olivia, for inviting me to speak today. It was actually, I know time flies, but it was actually probably more than a couple of years ago. Yes, it was way before we got into all this lockdown business. So very different times. But I'm very pleased to be able to come back and speak with you today, and to share some of the latest insights coming up from our research on this topic of voice. I'm Helen Shipton, as Leanne said, and I have a particular remit in heading up a research centre here at Nottingham Business School, which means that I'm responsible for delivering on research projects and having a particular focus on research which has relevance in practice. So we're keen to do work that actually matters for businesses, which is why I'm so pleased that we've got the opportunity to talk to you who are on the cutting edge about this important line of research. We've done a number of funded projects, or 2 funded projects for the CIPD, and we also do work for bodies like the ESRC, Economic and Social Science Research Council, the Lloyd's Registry, and actually some applied research as well direct with organisations. So I'm going to share my slides, and as I should say actually before I start, I'm really pleased to have Louise Tommasi join me for the presentation, because Louise has been working with us at the centre, CPWOP for short, for some time. So it's a real pleasure to have Louise co-presenting. So we're a double act, if you like. So okay, I'm going to put my slides up, so hopefully you can see them. Are they coming through? Good.
Yeah, we can see them. Yes.
All right, brilliant. So right, so the topic of today's talk is having voice at work and employee perspective. And as Leanne mentioned, the work is actually based on some commissioned work by the CIPD investigating voice at work. We've actually, as I mentioned, conducted 2 phases of research. The first phase was where we set out the theoretical grounding for voice, and we actually launched a major survey through YouGov, which included just over 2,000 employees across the UK, and that actually it did include Scotland as well. It was across the UK, so it should have relevance as well within Scotland in that sense. That then led to a series of case studies where we had some in-depth analysis of 6 organisations, and we actually have 2 reports which are available on the CIPD website. One that was produced in 2019, and a second report which came out in 2021. And this the other element that we want to highlight today is that we have a series of practitioner reports which have been produced based on that earlier piece of work with the CIPD, and which really talk about the value of voice and the role of voice in a practitioner setting. So this is the area that Louise is going to speak to in more detail, but those reports are also available. Those practitioner reports are also available, and a series of colleagues have from practice have actually been commissioned and produced those, including Louise. Okay, so what should we do then to actually highlight, to actually get into this subject? We did quite a lot of work in preparing the ground, so we did a lot of work on the literature, sort of scoping workshops, working with practitioners, testing out ideas and so on. That led to the development of our voice survey, and we used sort of established measures from literature to do that. The survey came out, was administered We designed it. It was administered by YouGov in August 2018, so sort of 3 years ago now. And we then had a team working on the data, analysing the data, testing the scales, and using analysis techniques to get to know the data better. So this is this is actually the piece of research that I'm going to be speaking to today, because it's the one that directly feeds into the practitioner reports, so it's particularly relevant to talk through from that side. Just to give you a sense of the kind of spread of the sectors, it's a representative sample, so this is actually fully representative of employment across the UK. So you can see the various respondents from those different elements within the UK economy. We had, as you can see, we had 78% people from private sector organisations responding. We had a smaller proportion, but nonetheless significant proportion, from public sectors, some voluntary organisations, and some a very small proportion of nationalised industries. So, and that was the kind of spread. I should also say that we've looked at the data in terms of the effects of size, particularly on voice, and we've also got some quite interesting findings on that, which are talked through in more detail in the report. So we're certainly happy to talk about that if it's relevant for people as well. Really what we're doing in this stage of the research is to examine two different forms of voice which come out from the literature, and I'll talk more about what we mean by that in a minute and make it more concrete. But essentially, the literature argues that there are two different forms of voice: what you call individual voice, which is your ability to feel human at work, to bring yourselves to work, to be authentic in the workplace, as opposed to organisational voice, which is concerning your ability to contribute, your sense that you can make a difference to outcomes in the organisation, that you have opportunities to share ideas. And one is focused very much on the ability of individuals to feel themselves at work and articulate challenges and concerns. The other is really about how do we harness the ability, the insights that people have to improve the organisation. So there are kind of it's quite a distinct and different perspective when we look at the two dimensions. But we were interested to understand whether those two dimensions actually held up when we tested for it, because it hasn't ever been done before. This is really quite new. So we wanted to understand if we could, in fact, separate the two forms of voice according to people's experiences, and also what was actually helping to give rise to the two forms of voice. And the next step on from that, which is something I'll talk a little bit more about today, although I'm happy to talk about the antecedents as well. That's probably something Louise will also cover. But the effects of the voice, so the different effects of the different voice forms, individual and organisational voice, on different outcomes and different the way people feel about work and the way they actually contribute to the organisation. So just to kind of make that a bit more concrete, what we were asking for when we were talking about organisational voice was the feeling that people had who responded about whether they were able to make recommendations concerning issues that affect this work group. So it's to do with their ability to actually change things or to improve things in the business. On the other hand, the individual voice dimension was really looking at whether in your work unit you can express your true feelings about the job. So can you actually say what you genuinely think without being fearful of the effect that that might have on outcomes such as how you're rated, how you're rewarded, how you're recognised. And alongside that, we also looked at another dimension, which is employee silence. And this is really quite interesting sort of element of the polar opposite of voice, of course, which is people choosing to remain silent. It's not just people not saying anything, it's people who choose not to speak, although they actually have something they would like to say. So it's very specifically defined, and we do find that some of the antecedents, some of the explanations why voice occurs can shed light on the reasons for silence as well. So it's quite an interesting dimension that obviously holds back both forms of voice. So what we have then with individual voice is the opportunity to express your voice. And you have the ability through capturing that to get a sort of insight really into how people assess their environments. And that hopefully would lead to people feeling better and feeling a stronger sense of well-being about where they actually operate. Organisational voice is about the need for voice. The organisation actually needs and draws on those voices from the individuals. It potentially signals that problems and challenges might exist in the work environment, and it potentially can evoke a more negative tone if people feel pressured and feel that they're kind of put on the spot and are required to do that. So anyway, so I'm going to just share some of the results, the headlines really that came through in the analysis. And so what we're doing is we've got these 2,300 employees spread across the various parts of the UK, representative sample. The people responding are employees who have a line manager, so they're people who are in an organisation. And they are completing a survey that we designed based on the principles around what are the two main forms of voice, what might explain whether people experience voice or not, what effect is that likely to have on how employees feel about work. So when we were looking at those questions, obviously we were interested to rule out other effects, because you can imagine if you're trying to understand about whether people feel they have voice, education might be really important. So somebody who's more highly educated might feel they simply more confident about articulating their opinions. You would expect somebody at a more senior level to be more confident in that sense, to be able to articulate their ideas. And there is some evidence of effects of gender. I mean, there is some quite interesting research around which says that actually females sometimes find it more difficult to speak up. So we wanted to take that into account as well in our analysis, as well as the effect of tenure, because tenure, of course, can be an important influence in different ways. It could be that somebody actually feels a lot more confident and capable of speaking up, but they've been with the organisation some time, or alternatively, they might actually feel completely switched off and not interested and not want to speak because maybe they've felt that they've been powerless through past experience. So tenure could work in either direction, but again, that was something that we thought it was important to take into account when we were doing the analysis. So in this analysis that we carried out on the sample, those variables were actually factored in as in a way that they weren't actually influencing the main relationships we were looking at. So what do we find then? These are some of the headlines. I suppose what I think is really interesting here, and you can see the tall purple bar, what that's saying is that actually when we do this piece of analysis, which is a regression analysis, we are trying to understand what amount of variance does the individual voice account for in the analysis. And what we can see is that people who have individual voice actually report that they have significantly higher levels of commitment to the organisation than is the case of people with organisational voice. So in other words, people who've got that ability to be authentic in the workplace, to bring themselves to work, feel they can raise concerns and challenges, even if they're not directly relevant to improving the organisation. What we can see is that when people report they've got that form of voice, they also report they have higher levels of commitment to that organisation. But we don't see the same pattern for organisational voice. We've also called that promotive voice, actually. But what you can see, what the diagram shows here, is that actually there is very little effect of organisational voice on organisational commitments. And commitments are really powerful things to have, because it's all to do with how your employees feel proud of where they work, how they feel that they'd like to stay with your organisation, how they would talk about your organisation to others outside, and feel proud to be able to do that. So it's quite interesting that the individual voice has the much stronger effects on commitment than the organisational voice. And then turning to this one, I think is absolutely fascinating, because this is showing the effect of voice on burnout. So we looked at burnout. Obviously, it's negatively scored, but what the results show here is that human voice, or individual voice, as we're talking about it here, has a very strong negative effect on employee burnout. So it's according to what we found, people who report they have higher levels of individual voice have correspondingly lower burnout. And actually, we found the opposite for organisational voice. So in fact, people who often, according to our results anyway, people who report higher levels of organisational voice tend to feel more burnt out. So it's the opposite effect, again, which I think is really interesting, because a lot of the kind of the hyperbole about voice tends to categorise voice very much as something that you do to improve things for the organisation. But I think what these results are showing is that actually you need to think beyond kind of using voice just to improve things for the organisation. You need to kind of try and get to where people are, to say that they actually feel that, you know, they can raise things that they're concerned about, whether it or not it's actually directly relevant to the business. So that's I think also a fascinating insight there. The other factor that this is where organisational voice does have the more strong effect, and that's when we're talking about innovation. So when people report on the extent to which they feel they can be creative or be innovative at work, we had a measure of that in our survey. We can see that people who have higher levels of organisational voice also tend to report themselves to have higher levels of innovative behaviours. And we do still see an effect for individual voice or human voice, but it's not quite such a strong effect. So so that's the area, I think, where organisational voice really does pay dividends. So okay, so what, just because I need to hand over to Louise in a moment, but basically some of the implications are, I suppose, we're highlighting the importance of voice for employee well-being as well as commitment and performance, which is probably more important than ever, especially given, you know, what we've all been through with and are going through with the pandemic. Our work showed that the two voice forms, they are distinct and different. So people can experience one form of voice, but not the other. They don't necessarily have to have both. And the data revealed that each form of voice exerts differential effects on these critical outcomes: commitment, burnout, and innovation. What we do show as well, which I haven't got time to talk about, but there are differential predictors So psychological safety is especially important for individual voice, but actually this solicitation, this drawing out of employees' ideas, which the line manager can enact, a skillful line manager can enact, that's particularly important for organisational voice. So it'd be good to sort of talk more about further implications, but there are, I think, suggestions there for training and development, performance review, line manager skills, and so on. So anyway, I'm going to, that's the end of my bit. I'm going to, at this stage, invite Louise to join the conversation. And Louise is going to give her insights from practice based on her experience as Chief People Officer. If I got your title right, Louise, please forgive me.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to meet you all virtually. And I'm delighted to be invited to this call today. It's a topic that's been part of my life now for certainly all of my career, but notably working with Helen and the team for probably 2+ years now. So delighted to be able to share some of my insights and obviously to words of wisdom, perhaps, I don't know, but anything I can do to kind of help you on your journey on employer voice, but obviously I'd be delighted to see what I can do to help. So just a bit about myself. So I've been in HR quite a while, so 20+ years of experience across multiple industries and sectors. Started my career as a graduate at Asda Walmart, moved into the food and drink sector, which was a US-owned organisation, moved into the sporting goods sector working for Pentland, which I focused on the Speedo brands, the swimwear brand there, and did quite a number of roles in Pentland. And then more recently worked in aerospace, more the logistics side of aerospace. Very fascinating 4.5 years just coming from that company, actually, where it was private equity owned, and it was American leadership team, and obviously going through various challenges of a recent merger whilst going through COVID. So that was an interesting experience, to say the least. And then more recently, I've literally 6 weeks on my new job working for Ideagen as their Chief People Officer. So obviously now sat in a different location than when I first got to know Helen as part of the research that we kicked off. So I've been a passionate member of the CIPD for a while, since '94. As soon as I graduated, I wanted to get straight into doing my studying and get my kind of experience, kind of working through my qualifications, and obviously wanted to be a member of the CIPD to help with that. And then back in 2010, I became a chartered fellow as well. So really working through my kind of experience and obviously my membership with the CIPD. And I've always worked with the CIPD, and definitely I've utilised many of their resources and tools along the way through my career. So as you probably already heard, my connections with this piece of work started pre-COVID. It started when I was working in the aerospace logistics company, and I've known Helen all the way through that and worked with her team as part of this study. So I was one of the 6 organisations that was invited along to be a case study, and it was very it was kind of a risk, actually, inviting people from the university into your business to take a kind of a deep dive and a real look at what we did. But I was very open to the challenge, actually, because I felt that whatever came out of the research would be to the benefit of our organisation and what we could do to obviously improve our particular position in employee voice. And let's face it, we weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We had things that we needed to work on. We had the challenges of different population in terms of blue collar and white collar, different locations. And then, of course, we continued the study, and then obviously that came to a natural end point as Helen was concluding her study, and of course COVID rapidly hit us, as we all know. Now, then what happened is I moved into phase 3, and Helen contacted me during lockdown and said, would you like to take part in the practitioners report? I've never done anything like this before. And so I was delighted to actually get involved, working with a fantastic team of people. And we came together very quickly during lockdown, actually, to develop our practitioners guide. And it was fascinating to bring different perspectives and different insights from different companies as well. So that was a really liberating piece of work that I was involved in. Now I can put on my CV that I'm a co-author, which is something I can't profess to have done before this year. So it's really great to be part of that group. And I loved actually listening to what they had to say. And I'll be honest, I took away some fantastic ideas from developing the practitioner's guide as well. So moving through, just let that come up. So the practitioner's guide, if you haven't had a chance to see this, I would highly recommend you go read the report. It's a very, very short piece of work. It will not take you very long to read. It's something that's just for you to pick up very quickly and get some real practical tips and hints on how to first get going or to continue your journey on the employee voice kind of roadmap. So what we did as a team, we kind of worked on individual component parts of the report. So first and foremost, we talked about the benefits of organisational voice for the employer, and I think many of you that have probably been party to this already, perhaps already started your journey with employee voice, or very much further down the road, you probably already experienced some of these benefits. But clearly what I was experiencing when we were putting this report together is that there was multiple benefits. And I think, you know, I've seen these tangibly in the organisations that I've worked for. You do get that trust, which many organisations struggle with. I get that. But you do really start to build up that trust element with your employees in terms of really engaging with them and getting them involved in conversations, and they trust in you in terms of what you've got to say about what's happening in the business. I think importantly as well is about other benefits, is that it's about really getting to know what's happening on the ground, what's happening across your business, and where's those risks and opportunities. And I love the fact that it also helps you to get that real diverse opinion coming through. So they were some of the key benefits I've personally experienced, and we certainly saw that through the development of this report. From an individual voice perspective, there's lots of benefits that an employee or company can benefit from. You know, the job satisfaction is something that Helen's talked about, and that kind of engagement is certainly something that does come through very heavily. And then obviously that translates into retention, engagement of staff, and obviously getting that extra discretionary effort that you get from people. So I've personally valued that element of you know, really connecting with people on a different level. You get an extra element of return from your employees in terms of what they've got to say. In the report, you'll see that there's a section that talks about what HR can do to really embed organisational voice in the organisation, and how you can create that culture. And I'll come on to the next slide in a moment about what probably there's some caveats to that. But what I would say is HR, we have a huge influence in how to help the organisation to be really effective with this. And obviously we have to be ambassadors ourselves in making sure that employee voice emanates from ourselves as well as through others in the organisation. Now in the report, there are 12 hints and tips that's provided. By no means is it a conclusive hints and tips guide, but it probably provides you with the most pertinent points that you would probably want to consider if you were wherever you are on your particular roadmap for employee voice. And I'm going to come on to some case studies in a minute, but then the final part of the practitioners report was some practical advice in terms of using different channels in order to really reach out to employees to be able to establish where are they and how are they feeling in the organisation. So this multiple channel piece was really prevalent, both in terms of the research that Helen did, but also what came out in the practitioners' report as well. So the caveat I said I would talk about is, in order to create a successful culture, we've heard already in previous slides about creating this psychologically safe environment. It's really, really important, and that's really hard to do. It's not something that comes naturally to any organisation. You have to work at it, and you have to build that trust over time. But certainly from my experience, I've had some great successes at it, and I've also had some trial and errors, and things haven't quite worked out. So I think creating that safe culture is really important in order to help people feel that they can have a voice in an organisation. Now, we'll come on to a bit about perhaps how to do that shortly, but the other thing to note is that it takes time and effort. You might already be far down the journey of doing this stuff, which is great, but you might want to think about what's the next level, the next innovative technique you want to deploy. Or it might be that you just simply want to get started and you don't know how to. What I would say is, wherever you are on your journey, it takes time to get right and to maintain the good work that you're doing. So don't think that this is going to be something that happens quickly overnight. Recognise that it takes time to do so. HR is an enabler for sure, but you're not the sole custodian of this. You do need people around you, and you need the support of your leaders to really make this successful. And I've found that particularly if I've got a CEO, if I've got a boss that's, not supporting the initiatives or supporting this particular piece of work, then clearly you're going to have a battle on your hands trying to make this effective. So really, how do you engage those is going to be very, very key. And of course, every organisation, all of you on this call today, you're all unique. So even though I may suggest some ideas, it'd be clear that not all of them will work for your organisation, and that was very clear when I was talking to my fellow people on the practitioners report. Although there were some fantastic ideas, you recognised that possibly wouldn't translate into the organisation that I was working for. So as I say, there's 12 top tips, which they're all available in the report for you to read. And then again, just going back to what Helen said about that individual voice is employee centred. Am I heard? Do my needs matter? And it's important to have that distinction between individual voice and organisational voice. Where that organisational voice is about, it is centred around what the organisation needs to do, how to capture ideas, how to improve practices. So whilst there are two distinctions, what you will find is, and I certainly found this, is in day-to-day practice, you don't necessarily look at it in that way. You don't necessarily divide it into individual and organisation. There are huge amounts of overlap in terms of some of the practices that you may deploy that contribute both to the individual and the organisation at the same time. So you don't have to have them as distinct parts necessarily to make this successful. Okay, so I'm going to get into just a few case studies. Now what I chose to do here today is, from those 12 top tips, I've decided just to pull out just a few case studies to talk through. I couldn't go through 12, otherwise we'd run out of time today, but certainly the one that came out really strongly across the research that Helen and the team did, and also through working on the practitioners report, is linking back to the values and behaviours of your organisation. This was something that actually came out quite strongly in all avenues, the people that I was speaking to. Do your values actively encourage voice across the organisation? It's really key to check that. Or are they in direct contravention with what you're trying to achieve? So a classic example is, if you've got honesty or transparency as part of your values, does that relate to how you talk to your people, or how you ask them to kind of feed back your information? Is it how you share information? Are you honest and transparent about what you do? If not, then your values aren't necessarily supporting what you're trying to achieve with organisational voice. So it's really important to be very authentic with that. Now, in terms of how to bring this to life, some of this might be fairly obvious things to you, but I just thought I'd just share what came out of some of the research that was done. Clearly placing values at the heart of everything you do, really bringing them to life, not making them a piece of paper in a drawer or sticking, some lovely logos on a wall. That's possibly one thing you might be doing. But think about how they translate into meetings, into policy documents, how you embed them into interviews. There's so many different ways that you could think about how those values translate. One of the companies that Helen researched, they had values champions. So how did those champions go about the organisation to really espouse the values and to kind of really bring them to life and helping people to really bring those values into every working practice that they did. Again, there's some lovely examples of sharing success stories. Some companies did engagement activities such as away days that then link back to the values. And one company, which I have named here, was part of the research, was that they rebranded their cultural values and behaviours piece of work. They called Our People at the Heart. So that branding piece is something that they felt was very important to them in terms of bringing the employee voice to life. So just a few examples there. The other, moving on to a different one, authentic leadership. This is really important. As I said earlier, is HR can't be the single custodian of this. You have to work with your leaders across the organisation to really help this become embedded properly. But sometimes they need help. Our leaders are very busy people. They don't always have the necessary skills to be able to do this effectively. That's certainly my experience of where I've come from. So we've actually helped work hard with our leaders to give them some time and preparation and understanding of what to do to be really good at listening to employees and actually getting that organisational voice piece kind of really buttoned down properly. So what we've said here is that leaders need to be prepared to embrace feedback. They're not going to get nice feedback all the time. And, they've got to be able to take that as it's intended and to be able to do something positive with that feedback. So that's an art in itself, to be able to help leaders to do that in an effective way. Expect to face challenging topics was certainly something that I've come across many times in my career, and to help leaders to be able to respond in an authentic and empathetic way is super important. So things that I've had to spend a lot of time doing is coaching leaders, training managers, and a whole plethora of activities we've had to do to help them to be very good at listening, engaging, and providing effective feedback. And that's came through a lot in the case study examples. So you'll see here some additional items at the bottom here is development was a key one. So help them with a number of different topics, such as how to give feedback, how to deal with difficult conversations, how to present information is key, how to listen, and how to develop and coach. There are probably some examples that you may already do today, but might want to consider if you don't. Leadership visibility was key, and that really helps to build the trust element as well. Walking the floor, taking time to get to know people, get to know the names if you have the ability and the size of organisation that works for that. Have that informal engagement opportunity. It might be going to the company Christmas party, or it might be if there's a social event. Have that informal downtime for people to get to know you on a personal level. Improving line management behaviours is key. So linking back to the previous slide on values and behaviours, how do management and leadership bring that to life in the way that they lead across the organisation is super important. So, one company did some listening forums, Certainly my experience is we've had behavioural frameworks that managers have been, they've through their performance appraisals, we've kind of helped them to identify some of the behaviours they need to work on. So there's some opportunities there that you might want to think about. Again, some of the case studies that that Helen looked at was shifting. They did some organisational restructuring, and one of the things that came out of that was to shift towards a new way of working from command and control to listening and engaging. So that's obviously something that if you are restructuring, as this organisation did, they really thought about how they could do that, move that shift from command and control to obviously listening and engaging. And then employee voice on the board agenda, that's something that the case study, again, Helen brought about, I thought was a fantastic idea. If you can really get it at that level and get organisations to take it seriously at the highest level possible, fantastic. I have to say that's not something that I've personally achieved yet today, but I aspire to have that in my organisation. Okay, moving on. One of the big areas that the practitioners report really pulled out is using multiple channels, and no one size fits all here, I have to say, and you may have very sophisticated channels or you may not, and I've worked in organisations that are in both camps, I'll be honest. So, you know, I think it's what really works for you, and you know, and it's what's practical, it's what's cost effective, it's also what helps, you know, meet the needs of your employees effectively. There's some examples only here, and I won't propose to read through all of them, but you know, some of you may wish to consider some of the digital platforms if you've got those today. I've had experimentation with some of the social platforms. I've had mixed success. Yammer was actually one that my company used. I know that Yammer doesn't suit everybody's needs, but it was quite effective in the organisation that I previously worked for. Engagement survey, I'm sure many of you do engagement surveys. You know, this is a fantastic way to meet both the individual voice and the organisational voice needs, actually, because you're hearing what employees want to do differently, or how to you know, reinforce some of the good work that you're doing, but also it helps the organisation to address some of the key problems that are going on as well. So it's a really lovely way, and I love engagement surveys, but critically important, it's obviously not just taking the feedback, it's also doing something with it as well. Again, other examples there for you to read on. And then finally, embed employee voice across the employee life cycle is really key. So examine whether your people plans, your policies, your practices all embrace employee voice. And you have, I'm sure, a very good understanding of what your employee life cycle looks like for you. But clearly, you know, think about how it blends with your reward system, your reward practices. You know, one company thought about how they recognise people for going above and beyond what they do today, and sharing proud stories about how employees were, you know, doing some really great practices. It was just kind of bringing that to life across the organisation. So through their communication channels and their recognition schemes. Again, recruitment, you know, I've talked a bit before about embedding the values into the recruitment process. This is really, really critical. You know, are you bringing people in to the organisation that obviously will embrace your values and behaviours, but also to think about how you know, you can really translate that message of employee voice in the recruitment process and into the onboarding piece of it as well. And then coaching, training, they're all kind of elements part of the life cycle that, you know, you can really bring employee voice to life. So here are just some classic examples that Helen and myself found as we were talking through different organisations.